I've been driving trucks for 14 years now. Coast-to-coast runs, night shifts, weeks on end with nothing but the hum of the engine and the occasional voice on the CB radio for company. But nothing prepared me for what happened on Route 89 in Utah. The first thing you need to know about Route 89 is it's desolate. The kind of road where your headlights carve through inky darkness, and the only signs of life are the faint glimmers of distant towns. That night, I was hauling a refrigerated trailer, loaded with frozen meat, heading to Phoenix. It started with static. I was flipping through stations on the radio trying to stay awake. The truck's clock read 2:17 a.m., and the last gas station was a good 50 miles back. Then, through the crackling static, I heard it, a voice. At first, it was faint, garbled, like someone whispering into a cheap walkie-talkie. Then it grew clearer. "Help me." I froze. The voice sounded weak, like someone barely clinging to consciousness. I grabbed my CB and keyed the mic. "Breaker 19. This is Blue Ridge calling. Who's out there?" No response, just static. I shook it off, blaming my exhaustion, and focused on the road ahead. The sky was moonless, and the barren Utah landscape pressed in on all sides. The only light came from my high beams. Then I saw it, a figure standing dead center in my lane. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt. The trailer skidded, fishtailing slightly before coming to a shuddering halt. My heart hammered in my chest as I squinted through the windshield. The figure hadn't moved. It stood there, silhouetted by my headlights, tall and gaunt with unnaturally long arms. "Hey!" I shouted, leaning out the window. My voice echoed across the empty plain. "You okay?" No answer. Something wasn't right. The figure's posture was unnatural. Its head tilted at an odd angle, almost like it was trying to listen. I flicked on my brights. That's when I saw its face, or rather, the lack of one. Where its features should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over a human-like skull. It didn't move, didn't flinch, even as the beams lit it up like a spotlight. Adrenaline kicked in, and I reached for the revolver I kept in the glove compartment. My hand shook as I loaded it. I wasn't about to stick around and find out what this thing was. But when I looked up again, the figure was gone. I sat there for what felt like hours, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled hands. The empty road stared back at me, as still and silent as ever. Finally, I shook myself free of the trance and eased the truck back into gear. Whatever it was gone. Or so I thought. About 10 miles later, the voice returned. "Help me?" This time, it wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the sleeper cab behind me. I froze in my seat, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The voice came again, soft and pleading. "Help me?" It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was closer, like someone was right behind the curtain separating the cab from the sleeper. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe I'd picked someone up without realizing it? Impossible. I hadn't stopped for hours, and the doors were locked. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of eyes staring back at me. Nothing. The sleeper was dark, empty. But the voice, it was real. I could feel it in my bones. "Who's there?" I barked, trying to sound tough, though my voice cracked. "If you're messing with me, you'd better cut it out." Silence. I reached for the revolver again, but it offered little comfort. My mind raced. What if someone had snuck into the trailer during my last stop? Could they have crawled into the cab somehow? I pulled over to the side of the road, gravel crunching under the tires as I came to a stop. I wasn't about to keep driving with some mystery voice in the back. The engine idled as I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab, the cold night air biting at my skin. The vast emptiness of the desert stretched out in every direction, the highway a ribbon of black disappearing into the horizon. I opened the trailer's side door and shone the flashlight inside. The beam cut through the frigid air, illuminating row after row of tightly packed boxes of frozen meat. Nothing moved. No sounds except the faint hum of the refrigeration unit. I shut the door and locked it tight. Climbing back into the cab, I did one last sweep of the sleeper area. I yanked back the curtain, Nothing but my bedroll, a few cans of soda, and an old paperback novel. I was alone, or so I thought. As I sat back down and prepared to pull back onto the road, my CB radio crackled to life. A man's voice, deep and urgent, cut through the static. "Driver, you need to get off that road. Now." I grabbed the mic, heart pounding. "Who is this?" "Doesn't matter," the voice replied. "Just listen. You've got something in that truck with you. Something that doesn't belong." A chill ran down my spine. "What the hell are you talking about? There's no one here." "Not someone," the voice corrected. "Something. I've been tracking it for days. You're not the first driver it's attached itself to." "Attached itself?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've seen it, haven't you?" the voice said, almost a whisper now. "The figure. The face that isn't a face. If it's with you, there's only one way to stop it. Don't look in the mirrors." "What?" I said, glancing reflexively at the side mirror. And there it was. The figure stood just behind the truck, its featureless face glowing faintly in the taillights. It didn't move, but somehow it felt closer, like it was pushing into my mind, seeping into my thoughts. The CB crackled again. "Driver, whatever you do, don't acknowledge it. Don't speak to it. Don't." The radio cut out with a burst of static, and the figure was suddenly gone from the mirror. My heart pounded in my chest as I slammed the gearshift into drive and floored it, the truck roaring back onto the highway. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. But the mirrors, every time I glanced at one, I saw it. Not always standing, sometimes crouched, sometimes crawling on all fours. Always closer. I gripped the wheel tighter, sweat pouring down my face despite the icy air blasting from the vents. The figure was relentless, flickering in and out of the mirrors like a broken signal. Sometimes it was right behind the truck. Other times, it was perched impossibly on the side of the trailer, its faceless head tilted as though it were watching me. The CB crackled again, making me jump. The same deep voice came through, though now it sounded strained, as if the man on the other end was struggling to speak. "Driver, listen to me. You've got to stop somewhere crowded. Gas station, truck stop, anywhere with people." "Are you kidding me?" I shouted back, my voice cracking. "You want me to stop with that thing tailing me?" "Yes," the voice barked. "It can't do anything in a crowd. It needs isolation. That's why it picks highways like this. You're making it stronger the longer you're alone." I didn't respond. My eyes darted between the mirrors, trying to gauge the figure's movements. But every time I glanced back, it seemed to vanish, only to reappear seconds later in a new position. I slammed my fist on the dashboard in frustration. "Where the hell do I go? There's nothing out here for miles." "There's a truck stop ahead," the voice replied, urgency rising. 30 miles. You've got to make it there. Whatever you do, don't let it catch you." "Catch me?" I said, my throat dry. "What happens if it catches me?" The voice hesitated before replying. "You don't want to know." That was all I needed to hear. I pushed the truck harder, the engine groaning in protest as the speedometer climbed. The trailer rocked slightly as the wind picked up, but I kept my foot on the gas. 30 miles. I could make it, or so I thought. I was about 10 miles out when the headlights behind me appeared. At first, I thought it was another trucker, maybe someone who'd help me if I flagged them down. But the lights didn't behave like normal headlights. They flickered, stuttered, then multiplied, stretching into 2, 3 for sets of lights. The mirrors showed something else entirely. It wasn't a convoy of trucks. It was the figure. Its faceless head seemed to split and shift, creating the illusion of multiple glowing eyes. The lights burned brighter, and I felt a strange pull in my chest, like it was drawing the air out of my lungs. The CB crackled one last time. "Don't look at the lights. Focus on the road. Just drive. Damn it." I tore my eyes away from the mirrors, staring straight ahead. But the pull was stronger now, an invisible force tugging at my mind, my body, my very being. The truck began to slow, as though something heavy were dragging it back. "No," I growled, gripping the wheel with both hands. "You're not taking me." I floored the accelerator, and the engine roared in protest. The lights behind me flickered again, the pull weakening for a moment before surging back stronger. My vision blurred as the edges of the highway seemed to warp and bend, the desert around me becoming an endless void. And then I saw it, a faint glow on the horizon. The truck stopped. Almost there, I muttered, my voice trembling. Just a little further. The figure appeared again in the side mirror, its body impossibly stretched and twisted. It slammed its hand against the window, though I felt no impact. Its faceless head was inches from mine, even through the glass, and for the first time, I heard it speak clearly. "Let me in," I screamed, jerking the wheel and nearly veering off the road. The truck fishtailed before I corrected it, my heart hammering like a jackhammer. The truck stop was closer now, its bright lights a beacon in the darkness. I could see other rigs parked, their drivers milling around under the glowing neon signs. The figure clawed at the window, its voice echoing in my head. "Let me in." I gritted my teeth and barreled toward the lot, refusing to slow down until I was right under the lights. As I pulled in, the figure vanished, like a wisp of smoke blown away by the wind. I threw the truck into park and stumbled out, my legs shaking. The other truckers looked at me like I was insane, but I didn't care. I was alive. I had made it, or so I thought. I stood there in the lot, my legs barely holding me up, hands trembling as I leaned against the truck. The fluorescent lights of the truck stop bathed everything in a cold, artificial glow. For the first time in hours, I felt a sliver of safety. The figure was gone, at least for now. One of the other truckers approached, a burly man with a thick beard and a plaid jacket. He was holding a steaming coffee cup, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "You all right there, buddy?" he asked, his voice gruff but kind. I tried to respond, but my throat felt like sandpaper. Instead, I just nodded, though I must have looked like a wreck. Sweat drenched my shirt, my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my eyes darted around like a paranoid animal. The man squinted at me. "Looks like you've seen a ghost." I managed a weak chuckle, though it felt hollow. "Something like that," I croaked. He didn't push for details, just gave me a knowing nod and clapped me on the shoulder. "Well, whatever it is, you're safe here. Ain't nothing gonna mess with you under these lights." Safe. The word rattled around in my head, feeling foreign. Could I really believe that? I wasn't sure, but I clung to it anyway like a lifeline. I spent the next half hour inside the truck stop diner, nursing a cup of coffee that I barely tasted. The place was lively, drivers swapping stories, the clink of silverware on plates, the faint hum of a jukebox in the corner. It was a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the highway. For a moment, I almost felt normal again, but the peace didn't last. As I stared out the window at the parking lot, my stomach dropped. The truck stop's bright lights cast long shadows across the asphalt, but one of those shadows didn't belong. It was tall, spindly, and moving. My breath hitched as I watched the shadow slither between the parked rigs, creeping closer to the diner. No one else seemed to notice. The other truckers laughed and talked, oblivious to the thing that was stalking us. I glanced around the room, searching for someone, anyone, who might see what I was seeing. My gaze landed on the cashier, a young guy with thick glasses and a bored expression. I bolted from my seat and grabbed his arm. "You've got cameras out there, right?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Security cameras?" He blinked at me, clearly startled. Yeah, I guess." "Why?" "Check them," I practically shouted, dragging him toward the counter. "There's something out there. You've got to see it." The other diners were staring now, their conversations halting mid-sentence. The cashier hesitated, clearly thinking I was some lunatic off his meds. But something in my eyes must have convinced him, because he reluctantly turned to the monitor behind the counter and tapped a few buttons. The grainy black and white footage flickered to life. I held my breath as the cameras cycled through various angles of the lot. The rigs, the fuel pumps, the empty stretches of asphalt, all looked normal. Then the shadow appeared. It slid into frame, its movements jerky and unnatural. Even on the low-quality feed, it was clear this wasn't a trick of the light. The cashier's face went pale as he leaned closer to the screen. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. The shadow stopped near my truck, its form stretching and contorting. I could see it now, its outline vaguely humanoid but wrong in every way. Limbs too long, head tilting at impossible angles. It hovered near the cab, then slowly turned toward the camera. My blood turned to ice. Even through the screen, I could feel its gaze. That featureless face, smooth and empty, seemed to stare directly at me. Suddenly, the lights in the diner flickered. The jukebox cut out with a distorted screech, and the chatter of the other patrons fell silent. Everyone froze, their eyes darting around nervously. "What the hell's going on?" someone muttered. The lights flickered again, then went out entirely, plunging the diner into darkness. I didn't think. I ran. I burst through the door and into the lot, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I scanned the darkness. The truck stop's lights were still out, leaving the area bathed in an eerie twilight. My truck loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the starless sky. And then I saw it. The figure was perched on top of my trailer, its elongated limbs splayed out like some grotesque spider. Its head turned slowly, locking onto me. "Let me in," it said, its voice echoing inside my skull. "No," I whispered, backing away. "Stay away from me." It crawled down the side of the trailer, its movements unnatural and fluid, like liquid shadow. My flashlight beam caught its form, and for a brief second, I saw what lay beneath the smooth, faceless exterior. A mass of writhing, black tendrils. I stumbled back, my legs like jelly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The flashlight beam flickered as the figure crept closer, its distorted limbs bending at unnatural angles. Those black tendrils rippled beneath its smooth exterior, reaching out as though testing the air. "Let me in," it repeated, the words vibrating in my skull, louder now, more insistent. I turned and bolted toward the diner, the flashlight clattering to the ground behind me. My boots pounded the asphalt, each step feeling like I was running through quicksand. I didn't dare look back, didn't want to see how close it was. All I could hear was the rasping scrape of its limbs dragging across the ground. The diner's doors came into view, a sliver of safety in the choking darkness. But just as I reached for the handle, something cold wrapped around my ankle. I hit the ground hard, my chin bouncing off the pavement. Pain exploded across my face, but I barely registered it. I twisted around, and there it was. Its tendrils coiled around my leg, pulling me toward its misshapen body. Up close, I could see the way its smooth surface rippled, like water disturbed by a pebble. Its face, or lack thereof, tilted, studying me with a terrifying curiosity. "Let me in," it said again, but now its voice was layered, deeper, more guttural. It wasn't just a request anymore. It was a demand. "No!" I screamed, kicking wildly with my free leg. My boot connected with something solid, and the tendrils loosened for a split second. I scrambled backward, my palms scraping against the rough pavement, and managed to get to my feet. I didn't head for the diner this time. I ran toward my truck. It didn't make sense. I should have been running away from that thing, not toward it. But I felt a desperate pull to get back to the cab, as if it was the only place that could save me. I reached the door and yanked it open, hauling myself inside. My hands shook as I slammed it shut and locked it. I was panting, my breath fogging up the windshield. The world outside was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of the figure's limbs scraping against the asphalt. The cab suddenly felt like a coffin. I reached for the keys still dangling from the ignition and twisted them hard. The engine roared to life, its familiar vibration grounding me just enough to think. My hands gripped the wheel as I shifted into gear, the headlights cutting through the darkness. But the figure was there. It stood directly in front of the truck, its tendrils splayed out across the hood like roots. It didn't move, didn't flinch, even as the headlights illuminated its horrifying form. His head tilted again, almost curiously. "Let me in," it said, louder now, its voice resonating in my chest like a thunderclap. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The truck surged forward, and for a split second, I thought it might actually work. But then the figure seemed to disintegrate into a cloud of black smoke, swirling up and over the cab. The tendrils reformed on the windshield, spreading across the glass like spiderwebs. Panic took over. I swerved wildly, trying to shake it off, but the tendrils only tightened their grip. The cab filled with the stench of decay, and I could feel the thing pressing into my mind, worming its way into my thoughts. "Let me in," it whispered, softer now, but far more menacing. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the CB mic with a shaking hand and screamed into it. "Help! Somebody, anybody, help me! It's on my truck. It's..." Before I could finish, the CB crackled to life. "Driver!" The deep voice from before said, calm and steady. "You know what you have to do." "What?" I yelled, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know what to do. Tell me." The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, it repeated, "You know what you have to do. Don't let it in." I looked around the cab, my mind racing. The figure was pressing harder now, its tendrils crawling through the vents, filling the cab with its sickening presence. My eyes landed on the emergency hammer mounted on the wall. And then it clicked. "Don't let it in," I muttered to myself, reaching for the hammer. My hands trembled as I gripped it tightly. The figure hissed, a low, guttural sound that made my ears ring. Its tendrils recoiled slightly, as if sensing what I was about to do. I raised the hammer and swung with all my might, shattering the windshield. The cold night air rushed in, and with it, the figure was sucked out, its tendrils writhing and snapping like a nest of angry snakes. It screamed, a sound that wasn't quite human, as it dissolved into the darkness. The cab went silent. I sat there, panting, the hammer still clenched in my hand. The windshield was gone, shards of glass glittering on the dashboard, but the figure was nowhere to be seen. For now, I sat in the cab, the cold wind slicing through the shattered windshield, carrying with it the endless quiet of the desert night. My heart thundered in my chest, my hand still gripping the hammer like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The figure was gone. At least I thought it was. But the road stretched on, dark and endless, and every shadow now felt alive. I didn't dare linger. The other truckers might come out and find me sitting there like a lunatic, but I wasn't going to stick around to explain. Not after what I'd seen. I shifted into gear, the rig groaning as it rolled forward. The shattered glass crunched under my boots, but I didn't care. I needed to move. Sitting still felt like an invitation for that thing to return. As the truck rumbled back onto the highway, my CB radio crackled again. "Driver." It was the same deep voice, calm but heavy, like it carried the weight of every nightmare I'd ever had. "It's not over." I gritted my teeth, gripping the mic. "What do you mean it's not over? I got rid of it." You didn't get rid of it," the voice interrupted. "You can't. Not completely. It's marked you now." "Marked?" I spat. "What the hell does that mean?" The voice hesitated, as though choosing its words carefully. "It's attached to people who are alone, lonely, broken. It feeds on isolation, fear. You've seen it now, and that means it'll keep coming. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but someday." I stared at the dark road ahead, the headlights carving out a narrow path through the void. My chest tightened, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. So what? I'm just supposed to live with this thing hanging over me, waiting for it to show up again? "There's a way," the voice said after a long pause. "But it's not easy." I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. "Tell me." The radio crackled with static, and for a moment, I thought the voice was gone. Then it came back, softer now, almost a whisper. "You have to stay connected. Stay with people. Talk to them. Be with them. That's the only way it can't get to you." I barked a humorless laugh. "Yeah, great. I'm a trucker. My whole life is the road. Isolation is part of the deal." "Then change," the voice said, its tone sharper now, "or it'll come back. And next time, you won't make it." The CB went dead. I drove in silence for hours, my mind racing. The figure was gone, but the memory of it lingered. Those tendrils, that faceless head, the way it whispered like it already owned me. Couldn't shake it. And worse, I couldn't ignore what the voice on the radio had said. It made sense in a twisted way. My whole life had been spent in isolation. Long nights on empty roads. My only company, the hum of the engine and the occasional truck stop conversation. I'd let myself get comfortable in the solitude, thinking it was just part of the job. But solitude wasn't safe anymore. By the time I reached the next town, the first hints of dawn were creeping over the horizon. The warm glow of the sun felt like a blessing, chasing away the shadows that had haunted me all night. I pulled into a diner parking lot, shutting off the engine with a sigh of relief. Inside, the place was bustling with morning activity. Waitresses hurried between tables, truckers swapped stories over greasy breakfasts, and the scent of coffee filled the air. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't sit alone. I found a table with a couple of other drivers, guys I barely knew, and forced myself into the conversation. Felt strange at first, like wearing someone else's skin. But as the minutes passed, I started to relax. Their laughter was infectious, their stories ridiculous. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. As I left the diner and climbed back into my rig, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The highway stretched out behind me, empty and still. No figures, no shadows. For now, I was safe. But the voice's warning echoed in my mind. The figure would come back. It always did. And the only way to keep it at bay was to stay connected, to people, to the world, to anything that kept the darkness out. So that's what I did. I started calling friends I hadn't talked to in years, made an effort to stop at every truck stop and diner, even stayed in motels when I could instead of sleeping in the cab. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep the figure away. At least, that's what I tell myself every time I glance in the mirror and see something move in the shadows.